You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of When God Intervenes. I'm your host, Darryl Rodgers, the family recovery coach, and joining me today in the studio is Mossimo Rigotti. And Mossimo is in Nebraska, and we're just talking a little bit off camera, and we have some things in common, and I know he's got a lot of good things to share with you today. I think we'll just start off, Mossimo. Why don't you share a little bit about your story, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. I'll tell the very abbreviated version because I think any segment of it could be an entire podcast, I often think. I was born here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and after being all throughout this country, I'm back here as of about 2.5 years ago. So it's been an adventure. And early in life, growing up here, I had a really good upbringing, strong family, brother and sister younger than me. Everything appeared to be just absolutely fantastic in my life. And as I proceeded into my late teen years and into college, I noticed that I was beginning to have these episodes of extreme mania, in which I would sometimes be up for 2-3 days at a time. I couldn't really control it. But the one thing that would control it was alcohol. And even though I had been diagnosed in college my freshman year as mixed bipolar, I decided that I didn't have that and I was just fine. And alcohol became that crutch that I began to use at 18 years old to lean on. And then that just became a constant all the way until I found my sobriety in my late 30s. But along the way, I picked up a cocaine habit as well and had some real challenges in that area. That happened when I moved to Los Angeles and worked in the entertainment industry. So it was really easy to fall in with the wrong crowd, so to speak, without thinking that you were in the wrong crowd. And after I left LA, that was not something that I could really get rid of. And the wheels began to fall off. I moved to the Kansas City area and I was running and operating a printing company, and things were well, at least to the outside world. But I was really struggling inside, trying to keep everything together. It was like a house of cards. And more, I was realizing that everything was going to fall apart. I was married at the time, so I had gotten married, and I recognized I was just going to crash and hit rock bottom. And this was about early 2012, I recognized that. And so I told my then wife that I wanted to get a divorce because I didn't want to drag her down with me. And I'm kind of glad we did that in a way, because we still remain on speaking terms now 13 years after our divorce. She called me on my birthday this year. So it's really pretty incredible to have that level of communication still. And as things just started to collapse, I ended up selling what was left of my business. I got most of my clients just kind of dispersed because I couldn't hold on to them. I couldn't do anything but drink basically all the time. And in December of 2014, I ended up on the street homeless in Kansas City. So it was a very cold winter, 2014, 2015. And I learned a lot about what life was like without anything after having pretty much anything I wanted for most of my life. And so that was a really tough time. 16 months on the street. Managed to pull myself up sober in March of 2016. And it's been a kind of a rocket rise since. So that's a very brief version of my life story.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. Massimo, thank you for sharing that with us. What was the turning point for you? What was it that really spoke to you that said, hey, okay, this time is it. I need to get sober. I'm ready to do the hard work, whatever it takes.
There was encouragement along the way that started before I became homeless. So in March of 2014, I took a trip with some friends to Destin, Florida, in what was basically spring break week. And I happened to meet a girl on the beach, Samantha Thomas, who she just instantaneously was my person. I don't know how to describe it any other way. The bond was instant. And after I returned to the Kansas City area, and she lived in Alabama, the relationship really grew through the time period over that summer and into the winter before I became homeless. And she was encouraging me to find a way to stabilize myself, to find confidence because the belief was that the underlying confidence or lack thereof was part of the reason that I was struggling. And while I was on the street, I didn't have a phone most of the time, and we exchanged letters. And so she was basically psychiatrist by mail would be the best way to describe Samantha, which was really kind of cool in a way. But we exchanged letters, and that still wasn't enough, but it got me thinking about a lot of things and trying to understand what was truly going on inside my head. Why was I reaching for that drink? And why was I struggling so hard when life had been so relatively simple and easy? And recognizing that I still didn't have the tools. And I ended up in the hospital in early August of 2015. And this was a really tough night for me. I ended up having multiple grand mal seizures, and one of them ultimately killed me for a matter of 6 minutes and 18 seconds that I was flatlined.
Mm.
Yeah. That was, and maybe we can return to this in a second, but I had a near-death experience you would think would have been enough to turn things around for me, but it wasn't. Within a month, I was back to drinking. And then I ended up back in the hospital again, and I just knew that I had to do something. And I hadn't been to rehab yet. So I ended up in a rehab facility that was sponsored by the state of Kansas. And they wanted to stick me in one that was in Johnson County, Kansas, which was where I was living, which is a relatively rich suburb, affluent suburb. And I told them no. Send me to the inner city. And they thought I was out of my mind. And they're like, why do you want to go to the inner city? And I said, because I want to be with people who are really struggling. I feel like I want to do the work that's hard work with them. And the only way I'm going to feel that hard work is I want to be around people who have struggled their whole life, because I feel spoiled that I haven't. And which I in retrospect is kind of a wild thing to do to yourself, but I did. And I'm glad I did it, because I met some people in there that really gave me a perspective on my own life, and to realize that there was no reason for me to be feeling sorry for myself about so many things. I had a leg up in so many ways, and I was throwing a pity party while living on the streets, which again sounds kind of humorous in a way, but that's what it was. And while I was there, John Hall was my, I guess, I don't think he was actually a psychologist, but whatever, he was the counselor that I primarily worked with. And we went on these real explorations into trying to figure out what was going on. He believed that something happened in my childhood. And I can tell you from my own coaching and working that 90% of the people I work with have something trapped in their childhood that they don't know about. It's like it's a blind spot. It's been pushed back. You don't know that it's there, and eventually it will overtake your life. And that's exactly what mine was. Mine was related to an adoption. My mom separated before I was born and then remarried when I was 3. And ultimately, I was adopted by her second husband when I was 8 years old. And there was a bunch of conversation during this adoption hearing, which led me to believe that I had never been wanted by my mom or my father. And that was the underlying cause of everything, the feeling of abandonment and the being discarded by everybody who I thought loved me. And that was just such a wild realization.
Yeah. That's pretty common in the work that I do. I run across a lot of people with very deep trauma, and some of it is related to suicides and deaths and things like that. But sometimes it's divorce, and sometimes it is issues around adoption. That's a pretty common theme. So I'm not too surprised, that's the sort of thing that came up for you. So how were you able to work through that and begin to deal with those issues?
Well, once I knew what it was, I can't even explain it. It was like a eureka moment for me. And I remember, because I was with John, and I just threw my head back and I looked at the ceiling and I was like, wow. I mean, it was just like a complete relief, because I recognized something that I didn't know before. And then once I knew that, I started focusing all of my thought into when I felt something, I could tie most every thought that I was having back into feeling abandoned or possibly abandoned, like somebody who's going to run away from me. And recognizing, then looking back at past behavior, that when I would want a drink, it was generally in situations where I felt like I was losing control of the situation. And so I would drink to regain it, which doesn't actually make any logical sense, but in my addicted mind, it made sense. So as I pulled all that apart, it allowed me to rewire my brain to recognize that I actually had the ability to feel secure and not feel so anxious about all my interactions with people. And as I laid down the confidence to just be myself, then that need for the drink, like, psychologically disappeared. But unfortunately, it didn't really disappear physiologically. And even though I was in rehab for 30 days and I maintained sobriety for about 5-6 weeks after I got out, I went into this rapid fire succession of extreme drink and then sobriety. And then, like, I would go like on a 3-day binge and then like 4 days where I would sober up, and it became so painful. And I remember the morning of March 23rd, 2016 really clearly, and we're coming up on 10 years of sobriety right now, is that I said, I just don't want to do this anymore. And I picked up the phone and I called Samantha and I said, this is it. I'm going to be sober. And she said, that was that phone call.
I've not personally experienced drug or alcohol addiction myself, but I work with a lot of people who have, and in doing the line of work that I think everybody has that story. Anybody who's in recovery, long-term recovery, has that story of that moment when they basically hit bottom, if that's what you want to call it, and decided, okay, I'm ready to change. I'm ready to do the hard work, whatever it takes. But I think a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, why didn't he just stop drinking? If it were that easy, of course you would stop, right? I run across people like that all the time where I have this kind of conversations. They don't understand that the addiction has overtaken you, that you're not really in complete control of your decision making anymore. And you may have great intentions, but then it is fall right back into that same pattern again. Notice, so you wrote a book, right? Is it Confidence Unleashed? Is that the title of your book, or is that?
It's Flavors of Confidence is my first book, and
okay.
my second book is Sober Method. This is wrapped around, again, this whole belief in confidence. This was something that Samantha and I explored like at great length, and I'll mention that she actually her undergrad work was in psychiatry, and ultimately was working towards her MD in neuro work. She was planning to be a neurosurgeon. So she was very intrigued by the brain. And so we had very extensive conversations about the impact of confidence in one's life, and discovering that we don't really know what confidence is. I mean, it's this nebulous thing that you can't really define, but you know it when you see it. Mm-hmm. And you know it when you feel it. You feel it within. It's that presence when you can walk into a room and not worry about anything else that happens. You're just going to be. And that's a very difficult place to reach. And so how do you reach that? And that's the basis of the Sober Method, which stands for Stoic, Observe, Behavior, Execute, and Restore. And so that stoicism is that real base of the whole thing, and that reflection and introspective look of yourself.
I want to get into that a little bit more in just a minute. It's interesting that we cross paths, because I had identified many years ago, even before my first son was born, I knew that I had a if you want to call it low self-esteem or lack of confidence. And it seemed like it was situational. Like in some situations, I was more confident than others, but I tended to be really hard on myself. And that confidence, that lack of confidence, really affected me in a lot of areas of my life, and affected my career, and really caused me to make some drastic career changes at one point in my life. And I just lacked confidence, and that lack of confidence was bringing on stress and everything else. And I saw the same thing in my son, Chase, who ultimately struggled with addiction and died in a wreck in 2014 that was involved drug impairment. But I struggled with, I think I had come up with a formula that worked for me. That's not perfect, but it certainly helped boost my confidence a lot in most situations. Over time, it's like I became more and more confident. And it's an ongoing process, and I was trying to help Chase with that, because I could see that he struggled in that area. Ultimately, I've tried to, because I started out in prevention speaking. And so I've tried to pass that lesson on. And it's one of the biggest things I talked about early on was felt like that a lot of kids were experimenting with drugs and alcohol because they lacked confidence. Right. And so we're on the same wavelength there. And so I'm really excited to hear more about your method. So why don't we delve into that just a little bit further? Talk about the sober method and explain how that works.
Well, sure. So as I mentioned, it's Stoic, observe, behavior, execute, and restore. And it works on the Deming cycle. So you just touched on something that is very prominent in this overall work of the sober method. So for those who don't know, the Deming cycle was created by Dr. Deming in post-World War II when he went to Japan and tried to help them with their manufacturing processes. Anybody who's worked in a manufacturing plant knows plan, do, check, act as a variant of the Deming cycle. But basically, I got the crazy notion or idea that I could take my brain and all the processes of it, and I could focus in on one flaw, and then I could figure out how to think differently about that, and then try it out, and then execute it repeatedly, and then, oh, okay, I got there, and then go back and work on something else. And so that's fundamentally how sober works. So starting with the Stoicism, it's one of my favorite Stoic principles to think about is Marcus Aurelius talks about, look at the man who's insulting you, or, I'm paraphrasing the verse in Meditations, but basically get inside his head. If he's not worthy of your respect, then why are you giving him the respect to insult you? So this is one that is very fundamental to so many people. Everybody worries about what everybody else is thinking about them, instead of worrying about what is going on inside yourself and how you can walk in this world without worrying what everybody else is thinking. Just what defines you is the best way to describe that. So then you would go exploring this and really, in a sense, meditating on it to think about, how do these things impact me? And so one way might be, this is again something very typical that people deal with, walking into a room of people you don't know. That could be at a church event, that could be at a wedding, that could be a corporate mixer event, a networking that you have to go to. How do you walk into a space like that and not worry that all eyes are on you, judging you? And so you work through ways that you might be able to help that. And so this moves into that observe step. Well, how do I react when this happens? So you're observing your behavior by replaying it in your mind. Or you can go actually through it, in an actual environment, and then go back and journal it and document it. So you're like studying yourself, really. The sober method is not for the, kind of casual user. This is somebody that really wants to permanently change their life for the better. You're not only going to find confidence, but you're going to be able to find that sobriety as well that will change who you are for the better. So after you observe this, you chart out a behavior, like and say, hey, well, if I were to do this instead, if I were to walk up to the first person I see and strike up a conversation with them just to take the edge off, would that make me not want to go to the bar and get a drink, for instance? And so, well, I think that would probably work. How would I do that? Okay, I would probably do it this way. So then you would go and you actually will test this. You can role play it, or you can truly execute it, which I certainly recommend. Put yourself in this situation. Test it. Does your method to avoid your temptation to get a drink work? So walking up to the first person I see, I walk into the room, Darryl, I see you, I walk up to you, hey, how's it going? You're, oh, it's great. Oh, man, I feel at ease. I'm talking to somebody already. I'm not nervous. Everything's going to be okay. Well, that worked. So I can move on to like restoration of this particular thing, as opposed to, if it doesn't work, you need to go back to the observe step. And a lot of people get caught in the OBE steps quite a bit, because this is where you're like going through. It's like, no, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? It didn't work because of this. Okay, let's try this instead. And so you're testing to try to figure out what actually works. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, once you get to the restore step, that's where the traditional type of making amends. Where have I had a negative impact on somebody in my life that this behavior impacted them? And then it's reaching out and making amends for this behavior that you've now feel that you fixed in your existence. And I always stress that forgiveness is not about becoming buddies with whoever you talk to. It's about that release that I have changed. I'm apologizing to this person, and And if they, flip me the bird, I can wave goodbye and go on with my life. So, and then once you're there, you go back to the S step and you start again. Let's see here. I'm on my 151st pass of my own program now. And so it's fantastic in the sense that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, like the things that you work on as you go through. In the beginning, it was stuff like I'm talking about here, where how the heck am I going to go to a networking event? But sober ends up working on all sorts of other little things. I'm using it actually on this current pass, and I'll have to go back and look at the recording of this to eliminate my filler words in my pauses in speech, because I do it both on podcasts and also in the real world, and it can be really annoying to people. So I'm working really hard on that right now. This is an exciting situation because there are people that are using sober method for all sorts of other addictions. Device addiction. I had somebody tell me they used it to stop biting their nails. Food addictions. I had no idea. I just came up with the method, and it's certainly being used for a lot of other things, which really excites me. So I know that I went off on a huge digression there, but that's basically how sober works.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, really good. Thanks for sharing that. I could see a lot of applications for that. And certainly is, like I said, I've had my own journey with trying to build confidence. And I want to dive into this a little bit more and find out more about your program. So I'll be looking you up after this to get more info, just to go a little bit deeper. My audience is mostly parents who have a child battling drug or alcohol addiction. And for the most part, it's the mothers. I know there are some dads out there listening too, and I wish the dads would listen more. But, the mothers are usually the first ones to reach out to me or contact me. Any advice to a parent, particularly a mother who is and I know this may be a little bit outside of your realm, but to a mother or a parent who's dealing with a child battling addiction, anything that comes to mind, what kind of things can they do to help their child in a right way?
A couple things that I think would work for any age, and it's certainly things I recommend to parents who do approach me sometimes for their adult children. So it does actually happen to me as well. That is, space is an important component of this, but it would probably be different if it's a minor child than what I'm actually talking about. But the understanding and listening is probably far more important than lecturing, is what I have always found. Why are you doing this? Try to, understand, and then literally sit and bite your tongue as hard as it might be, because the overwhelming thing that any parent or anyone that loves someone else, even if it could be a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, it's the same challenge. When you really care about someone that deeply, you just want to take control and do whatever you can to make it right. You want to wrap them in bubble wrap and make sure that they're okay is the way I kind of think about it. Mm-hmm. And that you have to hold yourself back from doing that. They have to fail a tiny bit and see that you're the steady person, the strength that they need to get out of the situation they're in. They know they're in trouble. They might be mouthing off to you or attacking you or yelling at you, but they know they're in trouble. And I think that's something that is really difficult for a lot of people to do, is to sit somewhat on the sidelines, hold the rules, be firm, yet allow the ability to fail a little.
Yeah. I had a parent that I was on the phone with earlier today, as a matter of fact, that used that same terminology, saying, I just want to wrap him in bubble wrap, And that's a very common thing. I think as parents, having been a parent who's walked through that yes, you make attempts to control out of fear. And, once we can come to grips with that, hey, I'm really behaving, my behavior, things that I'm doing here are attempts to control them. And those attempts to control are out of fear. And that's not working, right? It doesn't work. No one wants to be controlled or told what they need to do or wants unsolicited advice. So you're absolutely right. And I coach parents that all the time. Like, you have to become a good listener.
Mm-hmm.
and reflect back what you're hearing and just really, really listen with the intent to understand. That's great. I appreciate you sharing that. I know we talked earlier about your friend Samantha, right? And why don't we talk about that part of your story just a little bit more, because I know we have something in common there. So take me to that moment, and how did that impact things for you?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Samantha became a huge component of my life, and I couldn't possibly imagine my world without her. And unfortunately, my life changed on August 1st of 2020 when I got a phone call letting me know that Samantha had been killed in a tragic car accident, and it was a drunk driver. And that I can't even tell you what went through my mind at that moment. And so many of my friends who had seen how great of an impact she'd had on my life immediately were, Moss, are you okay? Moss, you don't want to drink, do you? Moss, talk to me, Moss. and I thought about drinking for about a nanosecond, really. It was then almost immediately, you know what? I'm going to take everything I've done and share it with the world. Because she was already at that point encouraging me. She was on her way to becoming an MD, and we were going to co-author a book about how to work through the addiction challenge, which is the sober method. It was still framing up into what became the sober method at that point, but she was actively encouraging me to write a book, and she said, we'll co-author it. That way you'll have an MD on there, and it'll make it more worthy of buying, or however you want to look at it. But I decided that at that moment I would begin writing, and I did. And it took me almost 3 years to put the first book together, and then 6 months to write the sober method. So my first book is more of a memoir and takes you through how the system came to be, and then the second book is all method. It's like a pocketbook, like AA's big books, what you take to know what to do.
That's great. That's another thing we have in common is the writing, and I have a memoir about my son Chase. So I know what that's like, writing a memoir about someone that you love that is no longer here with us. I know what that's like. And it was certainly cathartic for me. It was healing for me to be able to write that book and share my feelings. And honestly, I was really still very angry, and things were still raw when I wrote my book, and I did not understand addiction. And I've written some other books since then, but I do have one that I have an idea for that I haven't gotten started on yet. It's really about my method, the method that I use to help parents. Congratulations to you for getting that done and getting that out there for people. And the other thing, let's get into this just a little bit. Let's just touch on it. Like, what has your relationship with God been like in the past, and how has it changed, and where are you now?
It's definitely been one of the unique struggles of my life. So I was baptized Catholic. I was ultimately raised Lutheran, Missouri Synod. And then when I graduated high school, I completely walked away from the church. Now, initially that was more, I know better, I'm smarter, I can do things, I don't need God in my life. And that went immediately into being agnostic. And then it's like, oh, there is a God, he's not really impacting my life. Somebody exists. Then it became completely atheistic, and there is no God. And I would say that those years of my life were where I became completely lost. Those were the years I was working in the entertainment business. And it was actually Samantha who, when she came back into my life in March of 14, she said to me, God loves you and you can walk back to him at any time. And I was like, who are you? Like, I think she said that to me like the second day we met. And it just struck me as, okay, sure. But she had this way about her of being very gentle. And then so it allowed me the space to be, well, I mean, she's a pretty awesome individual. Maybe I should give this whole God thing another look, And that's literally how my thought process was. And it wasn't until my near-death experience in August of 2015. So when I had multiple grand mal seizures, but after the second one, I was in the hospital at KU Med Center in Kansas City, and I woke up and I look over to my right, and there was this very plainly dressed woman that, almost looked like a nun, but it wasn't a nun, but that's what she looked like. And she was sitting there with her hands crossed like she was praying. And then the nurse came in, and I said, is there a woman sitting over there? I thought maybe I was hallucinating, right? And he said, yeah, that's your friend Mary. She came here right after you got here. And I was like, okay. And then he tells me about the fact that I've had a couple grand mal seizures, and I ask him, am I going to be okay? And he said, well, we're doing the best we can for you. And I had presented originally at this detox center as extremely drunk. I had a blood alcohol level of 0.428. So, I mean, I should have been in a coma, but somehow I was still upright and breathing. And at the point that he told me this, I was at like 0.21. So still very, very high. But I had been drinking for so many years that like normal for me was about 0.1. So I was kind of in that area of like, I'm having some strong detox things going on. So he leaves the room, and I look over at Mary, and she's sitting there, and I said hello to her, and she said hi, and I said, why are you here? And she says, I'm here because people are praying for you. And I was like, who? And then she just smiled. And then I said that I think I can't remember exactly if I managed to get out anything more than help me, but I could feel another seizure coming on. And I remember reaching out towards her and asking her to help me. And then that's when I flatlined and I left my body. And I was immediately like, the best way to describe it was a feeling of complete peacefulness, no noise, and just warmth. Almost like it felt like being hugged by just tightly and just that incredible warmth is the best way I can really describe it. But it was just complete white. I couldn't see anything in front of me. It was just bright white. And then my maternal grandfather, his voice came and he said, hey, bub, which is what he always called me. And I recognized it immediately. And I end up in this conversation with him. And he tells me that I have a choice to make. And I asked him, well, what's the choice? He said, well, you can come with me right now, leave everything behind, or you can go back and do the work that I think you should do. And I just remember thinking, that's interesting. And then he said, look down. And so I looked down and I see myself, and then sound returned. And I saw Mary on her knees praying, and they're like paddles on me and, yelling at each other. And then I look back up at my grandfather, and he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I want to go back. He said, I'll be here when you get back. And I said, you'll be here? He goes, yeah, I'll be here. If you want to go back, just look over your right shoulder. And I just looked over my right shoulder, and I went slammed right back down into my body. And the best way I can describe that feeling was the feeling of incredible pain, like incredible pain, and never felt anything like more painful than that experience. And I think it's because I was released of all feeling of any pain, like mentally and physically. It was all gone and complete like purity of love back into the reality of the world we live in. And so feeling that all at once was really overwhelming. But that began my step back into embracing my relationship with Christ. And I today have rejoined the Catholic Church, and I definitely am a practicer of faith, and I witness to many people all the time and try to teach the good word, because I think it's very important that people know it.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think I've many years ago, I used to debate people who claim to be atheists. I don't believe there are any real atheists. I think everybody really knows that there is a God. What I've run across and what I believe is that most of us tend to project onto God anger a lot of times, maybe frustration, or in a lot of situations, I think it's a relationship that people have with maybe a broken relationship with their biological earthly father. I'm really blessed in that I had a great earthly father, although he was definitely flawed, just like all of us are. But yeah, I think that happens a lot of times. But I'm glad you came through that phase. I've certainly learned to be much less judgmental of people because of the experiences that I've had, and much more understanding and trying to help people whenever it comes up, overcome some of those barriers so they can. It has to be led by the Holy Spirit. It has to be led by God. I can't do it on my own, but certainly when the opportunity arises, I try to help people and just be loving and kind. And man, I'm a work in progress. I know we all are. Let's talk a little bit more about how can you help people out there, and in terms of the sober method. Do you coach? They can get your book. Where can they get your book? And just a little bit more about how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is available at Amazon, anywhere books are sold, or you can go to my website, sobermethod.com, and look me up there, which also has all of the services that I offer. Now, I have kind of a unique area that I really focus on because I felt that it was underserved. And so I focus most of my work in coaching is on high performers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, business owners, executives, people who, if they were to let others know that they had a challenge with addiction, it could potentially cost them everything. It could cost them their career. And I believe that you've even had a pharmacist on your show before who talked about this very challenge and how he lost everything and had to rebuild because of an opioid addiction. And that's very real. And that happens more than I think we're aware of, really. And that's where my focus is, because I came from that area. Being a business owner, I understand it really well. So I can work in that area greatly. But what I've recently started doing and is formed an organization community at sobermethod.org where anyone can join. And I'm starting to do smaller traditional type of meetings with classes via Zoom to help people in their journey to find their sobriety. And at the moment, I'm doing that. It's free. It's kind of my outreach, give back to the community, because I know that everybody needs assistance in this area, and not AA and NA don't always work. There are a lot of people that don't find success over time. So I'm trying to show that there are alternatives to the traditional methods, and they might work better. I think my method's the best, but that's because I created it, right?
Right. Yeah. But, there different things work for different people. And so certainly I think it's great for people to, if they're struggling and the traditional methods haven't worked, or they just want to give yours a try. Maybe they're new to recovery, or they're working on trying to get sober. I think it would be great for them to get in touch with you and give it a try.
Absolutely.
Not everybody is ready to go to treatment. A lot of times they have a lot of things they don't want to give up, career and things like that, and their responsibilities. And so they feel like they can't put those on hold long enough to go to a traditional treatment program. Maybe they could get in touch with you. You can help them work through some things. So yeah, I think it's definitely a fit for a lot of people. That's good that you've created this. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we'd like to talk about before we go here. It's been great having you on, Mossimo. I've enjoyed talking with you and getting to know you a little bit better. And I hope people will reach out to you and ask for some help. Let's put it up there. I'll put it up on the screen. Tell people one more time. Give us your website. And you said your book, they can find your book on Amazon, right?
Yep. Find my book on Amazon, Flavors of Confidence, Sober Method. Those are my two books. And links to those are also on my website, sobermethod.com. And my social media handle, all platforms, is @sobermethod. I also have a pretty good community going over at Reddit now. So if you're a Reddit person, and a lot of people are, you can find me over there. I still comment on all my social media posts and all my Reddit posts. I don't know how much longer I can keep that up, but I'm certainly going to do it as long as I can.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being a guest on When God Intervenes, Mossimo. And I need to stay in touch with you, and we'll continue this conversation later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Until next time, stay strong and keep the faith.